So I am really excited to hear from our next speaker. You know, how do we talk to people about the complexities of climate science? And as we've learned from other challenging topics, narrative is key, and as is understanding our audience. So Lina Yassin is a Sudanese climate journalist and activist. She's a master's student in environmental change and management at Oxford University. And she also works as the operations manager at Climate Tracker, where she implements capacity building programs for environmental journalists from all over the world. Lina has 5 years of experience in covering the global United Nations climate change negotiation, and she writes for several national and international publications. Now, it's pretty late at night. It's around 11:30 where Lina is. So thank you so much for staying up to present to us today. And if you can turn your video on now, then we will hopefully be able to get everything up and running.
Oh, hi, Joy. Thank you so much for introducing me. And hi, everyone. Thanks again for this lovely invitation. I'm really happy to be here. Apologies if I look a bit sleepy. It's almost midnight, as Joy said, but more than excited to be here. And I'm really happy to get a chance to talk a bit about my work and what I have been doing when it comes to climate change communication, specifically in Sudan. I just want to check if my presentation is working and I'm able to control it. Doesn't seem like it. So would it be able to? Yeah, so.
Is that okay yet, Lina? Sorry, we'll just, we'll get that working for you.
No, it's still saying it's disabled, but I can start and maybe someone can just move to the next page once I'm with my signal.
Yeah, I'll just speak to the technical person and get that working.
All right, sure. Okay, sure. All right, so
yeah, I'll do that.
Thanks again, everyone, for awesome. Thanks everyone for this lovely invitation, and thanks Joy for the introduction. So just to recap, my name is Lina Yassin, and I'm a climate journalist from Sudan, and I've been trying to write about climate change for the past 5 to 6 years. And today I want to be speaking to you about my personal experience and the lessons that I learned as someone who has been trying to communicate climate change and how complex it is, specifically climate science, to Sudanese people with the different audiences and their different beliefs and backgrounds. And I'm going to be basically touching upon how the lessons that I've learned, but also the main things that I use, the main tools that I use to communicate climate science to Sudanese people. So if we can go to the first slide. Yeah, I'm not sure if my first slide is on though.
Just a second, sorry about this, Lina.
Yeah, no worries. All right, yeah, so just to recap again, so what I do, what I have been doing for the last 5 years is I have been trying to write about climate change to explain to Sudanese people how climate change relates to their daily lives. And the screenshots that I have here are articles that I wrote, but not for Sudanese people. These are actually articles that I wrote for international audiences. Usually whenever I talk about climate change for Sudanese people, I strictly write in Arabic and I strictly write in platforms that are actually being read by my targeted audiences. But what I've been doing is I've been also working with Climate Tracker, which is an international organization that aims to empower young climate activists across the world to better communicate climate change. Because we at Climate Tracker realize that there's a big gap between climate science and the general knowledge among the general public. And that is mainly because science is complicated, specifically climate change science. And whenever you think of climate change as an average citizen in Sudan or average citizen in the Middle East and North Africa, you think of complicated scientific research, and you think of a group of scientists trying to figure out a solution. So it's not a problem that the average person relates to in Sudan. And this is exactly what I've been trying to tackle. And this is also what I've been trying to help Climate Tracker do across the Middle East and North Africa region. The way we did this in Climate Tracker is that we started a network of journalists in the region, and we tried to train them using different capacity building programs, including national workshops, regional workshops, online mentorship programs. And what we basically did is that we tried to decode climate science and climate policy and show them how they can link it to their daily life. And that's basically what I have been trying to do as well in Sudan. But before I talk about how I did it and the main tools that I used, I want to just give a brief understanding of why I even started writing about climate change. So if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so I'm going to be briefly just giving 2 examples of climate change impacts in Sudan and why I still continue writing about climate change and why it's still really critical for Sudan. So next slide. So the first example that I want to give is from 2020, and it's one of the most devastating this was one of the most devastating climate years for Sudan. In September 2020, Sudan had one of the most historic floods ever. And ironically, I started writing about climate change in 2013 because of floods, and because in that specific year, floods hit my city, and I had family members who had to evacuate, and that's when I actually consciously started thinking of climate change and started knowing more about it. And up until 2020, we're still having floods every year, but the problem is that the intensity of them keeps increasing and they're getting more and more dangerous. So in 2020, we had one of the biggest floods in the history of the country. And if you can just compare between a before and after, this is a picture taken where the White Nile and the Blue Nile meet in Sudan to form the Great Nile. And if you compare those 2 pictures, you will see how massive this was and how dangerous it was. So the specific numbers of people impacted, there's no official, there's no exact number, but the number is definitely above 1 million people who were impacted. And the number of houses that were destroyed is above 100,000 houses. So we're talking about 100,000 families that lost their homes, and because of the situation in the country, Sudan is a country that is right now going through a military takeover. So the political instability makes it even impossible for the country to have stable policies to deal with floods and have risk management strategies. And also the fact that the country is undergoing a huge economic crisis makes it even harder for the government and for institutions to be able to mitigate the impact and to be able to help the people who are impacted. So by the time we have the next flood, the families who are already impacted by the floods from last year would still be homeless, will still be staying in temporary shelters and camps. So as you can see, it's not just a problem of having floods every year, it's a problem of our infrastructure getting weaker every year, so that our way to actually mitigate and deal with floods become weaker. Can we go to the next slide? So another example that I want to give, which is a famous example, and I think whenever you think of Sudan, that's usually what people think of, the Darfur conflict, which is one of the biggest conflicts in the history. And that conflict impacted a lot of people. 400,000 people died in that conflict, and the number of displaced people it's millions. And the United Nations Environmental Program did a post-conflict analysis on this conflict to understand the reasons behind it. And one of the most interesting findings is that they found that essentially this conflict started because desertification in the north of that region was causing farmers and forcing farmers to flee towards the south because their lands is no longer inhabitable and able to actually grow crops. So they were trying to flee towards the south to find new lands that they can settle on. And because of that, they ended up settling on other farmers' land. And then elements like tribalism and religion kicked in and exacerbated the situation. But essentially, desertification and climate change were the main drivers of this conflict that to this day is still impacting the country. And to this day, this region is still suffering from war and still suffering from instability. So these are just 3 examples of how bad climate change can get and how bad it is already for Sudan, and why I still want to talk about it, and why I find it really crucial to tell people that everything that we feel in our daily life is linked to climate change. The Darfur conflict is a very famous example, but floods, everyone in Sudan is somehow impacted by flood. Even if you don't live near the Nile, even if your house haven't been flooded, you have a family member who lost their house, you have a family member who lost their job, or they lost their income just because of floods. So it's a very relatable topic, and this were some of the elements that I used whenever I wanted to talk about climate change. So I started writing about climate change and trying to use those examples to relate it to people's life. But then I the feedback that I got was not what I expected. So at the start, I was just writing about climate science and trying to explain it. Then I realized that no one is interested in science because no one understands it. And even me trying to break it down is still not that appealing. So then I started linking it to floods, conflict, agriculture, and how it's going to impact the future of the country. And then one day I got feedback from someone. Someone wrote me a really long email, which was an eye-opening email, even though it was full of criticism. So that person told me that they read my article about how climate change is the reason we have floods and extreme weather events. And he believes that I need to stop saying this and I need to stop writing about climate change because in Islam, and Sudan is a majority Muslim country, and Islam is the highest priority for people. So religion is really among the priority list for everyone, almost everyone in the country. So he was telling me that if in Islam, the concept of questioning God's plan is sinful. And for him, he viewed this flood as a test from God, and that he should be patient because there's a reward after all. And that me telling him that the weather change and these floods are actually not a plan from God is me being completely sinful. So he was advising me that I need to stop writing. And that's when I realized that he's actually right. I am writing to a majority Muslim country where religion, like I said, is highest priority. It's even higher than income because the belief over there is that if you believe in God and if you have confidence in God, he's going to be able to sort out your daily income. Even though the poverty rates are high, people still put religion above everything. So if me speaking to this majority of audience, my audience believe that way, then I'm totally using the wrong type of messaging. I'm not communicating science well, and I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm drawing them away from the issue because for them reading my articles is sinful, so they will stay away from me. So that was kind of eye-opening to me because I started thinking about how I can change this. So can we go to the next slide? So why did I start writing about climate change from a religious perspective? Because like I just said, I was doing it wrong. People were not listening to me. People were I was drawing people away from the issue. So can we go to the next slide? So what I did is that I first decided to come up with a counter argument. I decided to go and read the Quran and try to come up with a counter argument based on religion and based on what my audience actually believed in. So one of the main arguments that I'm now used whenever I write about climate change from a religion perspective is how in Islam there's a main belief that if you talk about that God sent humans on earth to protect it. And what I say in my articles now is that climate change is a clear sign that we are not protecting Earth. We're actually doing the opposite, and therefore we're disobeying God's plan. So, like I said, the reason I did it is because I found out that science is complicated and irrelevant for most Sudanese people. Religion is one of the highest priorities for majority of the people, and also that climate change was always viewed as a plan from God. So what I did is that I just used the same argument to my benefit, and I started telling people why we should care about climate change using their own language. And can we go to the next slide? And so, did I get criticized? Of course, I didn't expect people to be welcoming of my articles as soon as I started using religion narratives. That's not what I expected, but that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to be criticized because finally more people are actually reading my articles. So it's attracting. It's attractive. If you see, for us, religion is important. So if you see an article that has religion on it, you would be interested to see what it says. So I finally began to attract more readership, which is exactly what I want. But I also generated discussion. So even on online platforms like Facebook and Twitter, people would be discussing my article and whether if it's true or not. And that's also what I wanted. Like I just wanted people to generate discussion because even if they disagree with me, at least they're finally now talking about climate change, which is a topic that they probably never talked about. So that was a win. That was still a win for me. But it's also allowed people to think about the issue from a new perspective. So if you were someone who always heard of climate change, but always dismissed it, and you are now being told that climate change actually not just impacts your life, but it's also a religion thing. And you on an individual level have to do it, or have to react to it, because it's your responsibility from a religious perspective. So I started offering people a new perspective to think about the issue, and that overall raises awareness. And that's exactly what I was aiming to do. Whenever I use, the reason why I use journalism is because to write about climate change is because I believe that there's a big gap right now, especially in Sudan. No one talks about climate change, and because rightfully so, we have a lot of other things going on. But I wanted to write about it in a way that does not isolate it and make it an issue only for a certain class of people to talk about, and a certain class of people to actually solve, because science is important and everyone should be aware of the science somehow. So this is why I basically started writing about climate change from a religious perspective. And the results that I got were quite good. At least I generated, like I said, I generated some discussion. So can we go to the next slide? So another thing that I started doing is that I started also using different platforms. So it wasn't just about communicating climate change to writing about climate change, but it was also about going to the local communities and trying to actually get the message out in different ways. So instead of just writing articles, not everyone in Sudan can read. And on TV, not everyone have access to TV, not everyone have access to radio. So what we started doing is that we started thinking about how we can communicate the science to everyone in a simple way in the right platforms. So one of the things that we did, me and my organization, is that we started understanding, first of all, we started researching every community, and we realized that every community in Sudan is different. And they have different platforms that are efficient. So for some, radios were really efficient. So what we would do is that we would host a radio show talking about it, about Islam and climate change. For some, games were efficient, and games is actually one of the things, one of the most interesting things that we worked on. If you work on a game, we worked on designing a board game to try and combat the cholera outbreak in several states in Sudan. And we did it by designing a board game that kids in school can play. And through this game, we managed to raise awareness without telling people about the science. We integrated the science within the game, so we didn't have to go and give any lectures. And then what happened is that awareness started raising, and those kids would take the knowledge and bring it to their homes, because kids are talkative and they always talk. And another example that we use that is really powerful is khutbahs. Khutbah is when after the prayer, the leader of the prayer would talk to the people in a mosque and about a topic. So why not talk about climate change and climate science in that khutbah? Because that khutbah comes from someone that people respect. And so if the most respected person is telling you about climate science, they're more likely to accept that knowledge from them than to accept it from me. So that's another thing we found out, that we should use people's idols. We should find out who the idol is and just talk to that person, and that make that person be able to deliver the message. Another thing that I realized through my journey is that it really is very important to make your messages positive. Alarmism is one of the things that are drawing people away right now from climate change. Climate anxiety is real and we cannot ignore it. And the way the media now talks about climate change makes people dismissive of the issue, but also make them actively avoid reading about it. So we try to make our messages positive, but we also try to present solutions, because if you just tell someone about a problem and not present any possible solution, especially not tell them what their role could be, it's quite useless. Like, why are you telling me about this? Why are you telling me that there's a problem that will impact me, impact my future, impact the future of my children, but you're not presenting me with any solutions? What am I supposed to do? So we always try to present solutions on a local level, on an individual level, and even on a national level. And can we go to the next slide? So I'm going to make it brief, and I'm going to be wrapping up here. But what I want to say is that climate journalism for me, is a bridge, and not just climate journalism, climate media in general, is a bridge between science and societies. Because with all due respect, only few people understand science, and that though the people who understand the science and the people who understand science language are not enough to fix the pressing issues that we have right now, and not just climate change, all the global issues. So we need to try and bridge the gap between climate science and the societies. And the way to do that is through media. But also with the media, we need to be more creative about the narratives that we use, because the way we frame our problems makes a huge impact on the people that we're trying to talk to, and their behavior to that issue and their response to it. So, and this is what I basically learned after failing multiple times to actually get the message out to talk to people. What I learned is that I first need to understand those people that I'm speaking to. I need to analyze them. I need to understand what they like, what they hate, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, what makes them alarmed, and use all that knowledge in order to frame my issue in a way that is appealing to them, in a way that makes them encouraged to join the movement, and in a way that speaks to them. So I think I'm going to stop here. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer. And thank you all.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was a really, really interesting talk. And, I think, as a skeptical community, the lessons you've given us today are translatable across so many different areas that we really have difficulty with, when we think about, people's motivations for not vaccinating their children and so on. I can see how what you're saying would be so broadly applicable. So look, there's I'm hoping we'll see more questions coming through, but we've got one to start off with, and then I've actually got a couple of my own if we have time. The first question is from someone calling themselves Daddy Pig, and their question is, how can you be a journalist if you're an activist?
I actually think in climate change, being a journalist and activist does not contradict each other, especially in Sudan. Climate change movement is very slow, it's very low. We don't have that many people who actually call themselves a climate activist because climate movement does not exist. So as someone who identifies as a climate activist, I feel like it's part of my responsibility to communicate climate change. And the one way to do this is through media and journalism. So I don't see this I don't see by me being an activist contradicts me being a journalist. And I feel like it actually helps me a lot, because through being an activist and being involved in the climate negotiations, the COPs, I get to understand better what's happening. I get to have direct access to more experts and to talk to them and be able to communicate their science and their messages to my audience. So I feel like in this sense, it really helps me actually do my job better.
Absolutely. I think it's a common, concern people have around sort of the combination between those two. But in fact, increasingly, I think it's something we need to worry less about when the facts are on one side in terms of one's journalism, then, I don't think there's a contradiction there. I agree. So next question is from Craig, my fellow MC, and he wants to know how you avoid alienating religious people with your message.
So the way I try to do it is that I'm quite careful with how I frame my messages and I frame my story. And what I do is that I do my research well. So whenever I talk about climate change and religion, I'm very careful with what I say, because it could backlash really bad, and I could end up with the opposite results. So what I do is that like I said, research my story well, research my counter argument well, and I also consult expert religious people. Like I run my story by them and be like, do you think this is a narrative that people would actually understand? And do you think this is something that the average person in Sudan would accept? So I think by doing this is how I usually end up with a story that is well balanced, because I don't want to make it too much, and I don't want to, like I said, make the story backlash and lose a lot of readers.
Absolutely. Apologies, my dog decided to join the conversation briefly. So a question from Tim Mendham, who wants to know whether you've noticed a difference in the role of religion between Sudan and the UK.
I think, I've only been in the UK for 3 months right now. But I think I definitely did notice a difference. And Sudan religion is a huge part of everyone's role. There was an organization that actually did an interesting research before. They went around and asked a lot of people who struggle just to get their daily income. And they asked them, how do they know that they will have food on the table today? How do they know they will actually get some money for food and for life in general today? And all of them had the same, almost all of them had the same answer. They said, God is generous, because they believe that if you trust God, he will reward you. And for me, if I'm speaking to someone that has this mentality, then I definitely need to speak to them in my language, because otherwise they won't listen to me. So I think that's one big difference that I noticed so far, is that religion is really high priority in Sudan. While so far I haven't really, I'm still new to the country, but that's one big difference that I noticed so far.
That's really interesting, and it actually kind of leads on to a question I had for you, which is, I freely admit that I'm limited in my knowledge, but what's the experience been like for you as a female journalist as well, and has that acted as a barrier?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I'm not welcomed everywhere. And my message, it's not, that's why I said sometimes I have to find someone else who can deliver the message on behalf of me. Because in a lot of communities, the message is not actually welcomed when it comes from a female. Mm-hmm. And even, so I think that's one of the biggest struggles that I had. And that was one struggle that I had to accept. I can't change the culture in one night. And I don't have that much time to actually change the culture. My priority right now is to just communicate climate science. So I'm going to accept the fact that they don't want to hear it from me. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to go for someone that they actually listen to and make sure they understand my messages and they can just communicate it to them. So that's one big struggle that I hate, but I just have to accept for now.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message that we can, again, apply more broadly, is, when you can recognize the cultural context, the social context, it might frustrate you, but you still need to be able to work with it in order to achieve the outcomes that you want.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like I said, it's not that most ideal scenario, but because of the urgency of the issue and the fact that I just have one end goal in mind, I'll put that as my priority for now, and hopefully in the future I'll be more welcomed among those communities.
Thank you. One last question from Pamela Glickman, who says, as a Western atheist, I don't feel comfortable presenting pro-science interpretations of religion. I worry it will come off as appropriation. Should atheists stick to secular arguments?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. She says, as a Western atheist, I don't feel comfortable presenting pro-science interpretations of religion. I worry that it will come off as appropriation. Should atheists stick to secular arguments?
I would say that really depends on the context of the issue that you're talking about. But I absolutely agree. It really could, like I said, backlash, or it could be culturally inappropriate as well. So I would say it really depends on the context, and you should be the best judge of that, depending on what type of science and what topic are you trying to actually communicate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Lina, thank you so much for a really interesting and helpful presentation today. We really appreciate you taking the time. And now that it's getting so much later in the evening, I think we should let you go. And thank you again.
All right, thank you so much, Joy.